Hey guys, welcome into this video about the New Zealand housing market and housing crisis. I'm going to try and give a bit of background information on statistics around property ownership and such, and then kind of explain kind of the way the market works, and so I can kind of give a reason as to why the property market keeps on going up. So we'll start off with the statistics, some of the statistics here. I don't cover everything that's relevant in this video. I just chucked together as much information as I could. Obviously there's going to be stuff that I miss, relevant stuff that I haven't included, and stuff like that. I'm not a professional, and this isn't any financial advice or anything. This is just kind of my own opinion and drawing statistics from research I've done. So we've got 1,865,300 households in New Zealand versus 5.1 million people. Of those households, 1.26 million, or 64.5%, are owned by the people who occupy those houses. 32%, or 625,000, are rented, and 67,000 are provided free, presumably by government. A pretty negligible percentage on the bottom there. So we're going to focus on the others. So of those 32%, we go into we'll go on. So this is the census data. So this kind of goes over that same housing households data and the population data over 3 periods of time. So 2013, 2018, and March 2021. That's when these data sets are from. So as you can see in this first lot here, so 2013 census, 1.7 million households. This gave us a ratio of 1 to 2.546, meaning there's roughly 2.546 people per household. And then in the 2018 census, the number of households had gone up 2.13%. But the population, however, had gone up 8.98%. And this put the ratio up to 1 to 2.717. And now March of this year, 2021, we have 1.865 million houses, which is a 4.7% increase, so a larger increase than the previous period, but the population is still growing, so 4.7% increase in houses, but a 5.69% increase in population, so the ratio is still gone up, 1 in 2.743. So roughly 2.743 people per household. In other words, more houses have 3 people living in them than have 2 or less. So this data down here is just the population as at 2013, 4.4 mil, 2018, 4.8 mil, and then March 2021, 5.1 mil. So this is that same or similar information provided in a graph. So this goes all the way back to June 1991, and it shows that owner-occupied or home ownership was at 75%, where rented was at 25%, or just under 25%. And the whole chart, provided free, stays roughly the same percentage the entire way across, as it probably should. But rented goes up from around 24% to 32%, and owner-occupied goes down from 75% to around 65%. So we're seeing over the period of 30 years, we are seeing a decline of home ownership and an increase in renting, as you would expect in a market that just keeps getting more and more expensive, and a market that the number of households per capita is decreasing. If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So the media tends to blame investors and just say, like, oh, it's all the investors are buying houses, they have much more money because their properties have all gone up, and they're just buying more property with the equity from the properties, and it's making house prices just continue to go insane. So for that, they're blaming the investors. They don't specify which investors, they just say investors or landlords. They blame all of us. So there's a lot of scary statistics that get posted around on, like, specifically like stuff in NZ Herald, and that go around Facebook pages and stuff. And I'm on the first home buyers page, and I see a lot of negative posts towards investors, and I hear it everywhere. And I've heard some outrageous statistics, like absolutely outrageous. Someone tried to claim that 80% of properties in New Zealand were owned by investors. Other people have claimed that like half the housing supply are owned by like 1% of the people, or no, 3% of the people or something. I've had weird statistics thrown at me that I've been so confused as to how these people like get these. And I know some of them I made them follow up and they had actually misread and stuff, but the titles of these articles do imply things that aren't true. So I found my own data set here. It's official data that's drawn from lodged bonds. So that does mean that it excludes properties that are managed by property managers, because there's a data set that isn't included on here that had 2,074 properties in it, that all it said next to it was property managers. So I can't really include that data in this data set because it doesn't pertain to the owners whatsoever. I can't put any of the owners in each of these categories. So those have been left out, but that shouldn't affect the overall percentage too much. So some of these percentages down here might be a little bit inaccurate, but generally we could accept that if we did know the statistics for those 2,074 houses, they would probably fall across like an even distribution across these same statistics, meaning the percentages wouldn't change too much. But yeah, so for that reason, this data isn't 100% accurate. And credit to Anthony for this data set. He requested it in 2019 from the government through an official data set request. Not sure quite how that works, but you can request data from the government. So these are the different types of ownership. So I've left all of these types of ownership in, even though some of them are like owned by a company, because as a property investor, you can actually format your property ownership in many different ways. So we can't say really what these ownerships, like someone can start a trust, a family trust, even if it's just one person, you can start a family trust and give ownership to that trust. So that could be an individual person that owns those houses. Same with a company, you can start a company, such. So I've left all of them in. So these figures here, the total, is going to be the most important column. So we have 118,256 investors in their own households, that is. This doesn't include commercial investments, as it only counts like lodged bonds. So also if anyone was illegally renting their house and they didn't have a bond lodge, it also wouldn't count those statistics. So number of investors that own one property, 93,220. Number that own 2 to 3 properties is 19,266. 4 to 10, 4,752. 11 to 20, 556. 21 to 50, 266 people. 51 to 200, so getting into the really big numbers, 136, and 200 plus 60. So they generally, in the media, they tend to hate on pretty much anyone who owns over 10 properties. They feel that that's too much. So they just state investors. They always just hate on investors, but they always refer to the people who have more than 10 properties or sometimes more than 20. And if you look at this data set, like this is the amount of people they're talking about. Like less than 1,000 people that they're actually talking about across 118,000 people. It's just kind of, it's annoying that they lump all investors together and then they make rules around property investing to essentially to hurt the investors so that they stop investing when they're actually only kind of wanting to target these large groups. And also the rules that they're changing are hurting these lower end investors the most, the mum and dad investors, as we refer to them, which is 78.8% of the investors. And if you include the 2 to 3 properties, which probably still just mum and dad investors, just the casual investors, they're not like monopolizing the market by owning 200 properties or anything. They've just got 2 to 3 rental properties, which is, I mean, if they didn't have a mortgage, that'd probably be almost enough to have like retire on 3 properties. But even that, like probably not quite enough to retire on. And we're talking like 95% of property investors that are in that within those two categories between 1 and 3 properties. So there's a lot of rule changes going on that should be aiming to hit these people up here, but are actually hurting these people down here. The 95% of us property investors that we own between 1 and 3. I personally own 1 investment property. I believe I am what is referred to as a rent-investor because I don't own my own home. I only own 1 rental property. But I also fall into this data set off the chart because I have a property manager, which means my data isn't included in here. I have not lodged a bond. My property manager does it under their own name. So that gives a bit of background information into the numbers of property investors, property ownership, so you can kind of take the articles that you read with a grain of salt, so you can kind of see who they're actually targeting the articles at, and you can see how they're kind of trying to skew the data, and they get a lot of views from that, I believe, so they say what they need to say in order to get views or clicks. That's their job, essentially. They don't necessarily face repercussions at all for providing either false information or misleading information or not providing the full information. So, they're doing their job, but it tends to mislead people. This may be the most controversial part. There's a lot of people that I find it really weird when I tend not to comment on like Facebook posts or anything, but you see a lot of people claiming that there isn't a housing supply problem. People post like simple supply and demand problem, and people will put comments like, you're dreaming, and how can you even believe this and stuff, like implying that the people who think it's a supply and demand problem are stupid. To be fair, it's a minority of people. There's not many people commenting that, but it's a lot more than it's quite common for people to post it. Like on pretty much every single post I've seen about the housing supply problem, like there's people who jump on and say, no, there's no supply problem. It's just the investors keep buying up all the properties. So I'm just gonna like explain in my own words, um, like the market and how I feel the problem is going. I can't claim, because I'm not qualified, I can't claim that this is 100% factually correct, but it's pretty much common sense. So we have a buyer pool here. This is all the people. This isn't to scale or anything. This is just, think of this as all the buyers who are trying to buy a house at any one time. So at the top we've got the buyers with the most funds, and at the bottom buyers with the least. Middle, just people with the average amount. Then we have the available houses. So I've drawn this as half the size at the moment because we have not as many houses available and a lot of buyers. So just as a visual representation, that's how small I've made it. This doesn't necessarily mean that there's half the available houses as there is as buyers or anything. That's just how I've chosen to draw it so that you can see visually what's happening here. So most expensive houses at the top, most affordable houses at the bottom, average house in the middle. When you're marketing a house, you always want to get the most amount of dollars for it. That goes for anyone, for owner-occupieds, for investors, flippers, anyone who's selling a house, they want to get the maximum dollar for it. So if you have the most expensive house, you are going to advertise to the buyers with the most funds. Same if you've got the average house, you're not going to advertise to the average amount of the buyers. You're going to get the most money you can for it, which in this scenario, like directly translates across to here. Because these people are going to buy these houses, kind of thing, and then these ones will buy these ones here. So all the buyers up until here, in theory, would be able to buy a house, and then any below these lines, the buyers here will be unable to purchase a house because all of these buyers have more money and are able to pay more, outbid them at auctions and everything. So they will all buy these houses, and there'll be none left for these. So this is too much demand and not enough supply. If it were inverse and the available number of houses here, this column, were greater than the number of buyers, then house prices would fall until people stopped selling because the prices were too low, or people started buying because prices were so low and they thought it was a good deal. So imagine if this column here was half the available houses, then only these buyers would take up. Wrong slide. These buyers, the half buyers, would take up whatever available houses they wanted to. It wouldn't necessarily fall up here or down here. It would just be across the board. They would buy some of the houses, but that would leave a lot that was still available. So the sellers would have to lower their price in order to sell to these limited buyers, where it's usually, like at the moment, it's currently opposite. The buyers are having to meet the prices that the sellers are setting. So, in other words, if we had more houses available than we had buyers, there's essentially no way that the prices wouldn't drop. It's how a free market works. If there's more availability than there is demand, then prices drop until everything's sold. Either more buyers will come to the market because the prices are going down, or the prices will continue to go down until there are enough buyers to meet it, or people will just stop selling. So if we're focusing on the large scale problem, finding the ultimate source, then it's a simple supply and demand problem. And anyone who denies that, the only possible way you can deny it is by saying that house prices aren't too high in New Zealand. If anyone ever denies that there's a supply and demand problem, all they're saying is that prices aren't too high. Even if there's a lot of people that will say, no, there isn't a supply and demand problem, but they'll also say that house prices are way too high and it's the investor's fault. But that's like the question to ask them is, if there was 100 houses on the market and only 10 people buying them, do you think the prices would drop? Do you think that the people would offer less for those houses and the sellers would be forced to alter their prices because the buyers have so much options? Or how about if there was only one buyer? If there was one buyer and 100 houses, just go to the extreme case. I find extreme cases make it easier for people to understand. If there were 100 houses and one buyer, that buyer isn't under a lot of pressure. They have no pressure, essentially. Potentially some of those sellers could be under a lot of pressure because, various reasons people need to sell and such. They could pretty much go around and offer, if there was one buyer and 100 houses, they could offer half what the house has previously been worth, and they could offer that to all 100 houses, and in theory, someone would probably accept it. Whereas if there's 100 people in 100 houses, the market's probably not going to move too much because it's just you're going to line up. People are going to go for the best houses first, and some are going to start getting sold. And there's going to be enough buyers for the sellers. And in the current market, there's way more buyers than available houses, so there's absolutely no stress on the sellers to reduce the prices. We have started to see a little bit of a fall in the market, but until it's like a multi-month or even a year of declines, which it's statistically irrelevant. Considering we've gone up 24% in the past year, we could go down 20% and it'd still be an average year. Or, sorry, we could reverse 20% of that gain. Reverse math doesn't quite work on percentages, but yeah. Yeah. So that's, some people tend to struggle with that, and I know there was probably a bit of an untidy explanation. I was trying to get the visual down as well as I could to show this, but yeah, I don't know how well it came across. Let me know in the comments if that was kind of too difficult to understand. I probably can't explain it any better, to be honest. But yeah, that's my understanding of the housing market and the supply and demand problem that we currently have. I'm not getting into the politics. I'm not going to say anything about whose fault it is or anything. I don't know whose fault it is. But we do need to see some changes in the supply, obviously, because there is no way to control the demand. The demand being the increase in population. We're not going to control our population growth. So we have to increase the number of houses available. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got for this video. So thanks for watching. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Have a great day. See ya.